Morning, thanks for joining us. Welcome to everyone who is listening in. We're here today to talk a bit about the current situation with ads for CBD products. My name is Lydia. We've got Janet Taylor here from the Copy Advice team in CAP to explore some of the issues that are likely to apply if you're advertising these types of products.
Hello, there's lots to get through in the next 15 minutes or so, so I'm going to get started straight away. Most of the issues we're going to talk about today actually don't relate to the advertising codes directly, but rather to our understanding of the positions held by various government departments and statutory regulators. To be clear, it is for them and not the ASA and CAP to define and apply legal categorisation of these products. So we're always going to be deferring to them on this issue. It does remain a marketer's responsibility to make sure they understand the regulations and to keep up to date on any changes in legislation. It's a really complex regulatory landscape, and we can't really give any kind of definitive answers today. But we do want to try and give some information so marketers know what issues they need to be aware of before even thinking about advertising CBD containing products. Frustratingly, there isn't a one-size-fits-all definition, so marketers are going to have to do a lot of the legwork themselves to find out what applies to their own products. Hopefully, however, this is going to provide like a really helpful starting point.
Great, thanks, Janet. So let's kick things off by getting into straight away. What is CBD exactly?
Cannabidiol, otherwise known as CBD, is a naturally occurring constituent of the cannabis plants. In recent years, we've been made aware of various products containing CBD, including topical creams and vape products. The most common ones we see are actually oral products like sweets, oils and supplements, some of which also contain other ingredients like vitamins and minerals.
So are we talking about the same thing as cannabis? Isn't that a controlled substance and illegal?
We understand CBD is different from cannabis, even though it is extracted from it. The Home Office has issued extensive guidance in the form of a fact sheet titled Cannabis, CBD and Other Cannabinoids to help marketers establish if their commercial practice could result in the production of a controlled substance. This fact sheet was actually updated a few weeks ago in kind of mid-August 2019. The fact sheet talks about the often mentioned maximum allowance of THC levels of 0.2%. And it explains that this 0.2% THC amount, which we see sometimes in ads for CBD products, only applies to the variety of plants from approved seed types, which may potentially be cultivated under a Home Office license, and where only the non-controlled parts of the plant are actually used. This appears to suggest that the Home Office is saying that this 0.2% allowance does not actually apply to the final product as it's sold to consumers. In fact, the fact sheet goes on to say that a CBD containing product that contains any controlled cannabinoids like THC, whether unintentionally or otherwise, would be highly likely to result in the product being classed as containing a controlled substance.
Okay, there's quite a lot to get your head around there. So Janet, what should marketers do?
Hopefully they can appreciate that it's not the role of the ASA or CAP to give legal advice on whether any particular product is a controlled substance under the Misuse of Drugs Act. All we can do is recommend that they carefully read the Home Office fact sheet we've talked about here and obtain independent legal advice. Also worth noting, the fact that similar products may already be on the market is unlikely to resolve a marketer's responsibility to prove that their own product can legally be sold.
Well, that's good to know. So is that everything that marketers need to be aware of?
I'm afraid not. The next thing we need to consider is whether oral CBD products like drops, drinks, foods and supplements, which are proven not to be a controlled substance, could be classed as a novel food by the Food Standards Agency.
Okay, so lots of products with CBD in, but what does that mean exactly?
Well, the Food Standards Agency guidance defines novel foods as foods which have not been widely consumed by people in the EU before May 1997. So basically they're foods that don't have a history of consumption. Typical examples given by the FSA include traditional foods eaten elsewhere in the world, like chia seeds, and foods based on new processes, like bread, which is treated with ultraviolet light to increase levels of vitamin D. The FSA guidance explains that in order to be legally marketed in the UK, novel foods are required to have a pre-market safety assessment and authorization under novel foods regulation.
So what you've talked about just there, does that apply to oral products containing CBD?
We think the FSA guidance suggests so, yes. It explains that food businesses have not actually yet been able to show that there's a significant history of consumption of CBD prior to 1997, which is the cutoff point I just talked about earlier. What this means in practice is actually less clear at the present time. It seems a decision hasn't yet been made on how or if to actively enforce the legislation to CBD containing products. As we talked about earlier with the issue of controlled substances, CAP can advise further on the classification of these products under this piece of legislation, other than to press on marketers how important it is that clear classification is established from the statutory regulator and that any relevant authorisation is obtained. Once again, we suggest getting legal advice to establish whether your products can be marketed with or without a novel foods authorisation. We also, again, recommend against relying on the premise that if other people are doing it, then so can they. It's always best for each individual marketer to be completely sure that they can market their product.
Okay, so legal advice is important. So if the product, Janet, it isn't a controlled substance and doesn't yet require authorization as a novel food, which you've just talked about, what kind of advice can you give about the content of a marketer's ads in this situation?
Well, we know a lot of marketers are keen to make claims about the possible medicinal benefits of CBD. The Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, otherwise known as the MHRA, have issued guidance on the subject in Appendix 10 of Guidance Note 8, which is a guide to what is a medicinal product. Now, the guidance indicates that if a CBD product satisfies either limb of the definition, then it could mean that the product is defined as a medicine under medicines legislation.
How are these medicines and medicinal claims defined exactly?
Well, claims to treat or prevent disease, diseases in inverted commas here, are likely to be classed as medicinal by the MHRA. Guidance Note 8 gives really extensive guidance about what is likely to be treated as a medicinal claim. So we would really recommend that advertisers kind of have a look through that entire document and make sure they understand it.
So that's some of the theory there, but what does this actually mean in practice?
Well, the MHRA guidance suggests that medicinal claims cannot be made for CBD containing products without a relevant marketing authorization. Again, we need to reiterate, sound like a broken record here, that the ASA and CAP doesn't write or enforce medicines legislation. So we would recommend reading the MHRA guidance if planning on making a medicinal claim for a CBD product.
That's really important to remember. So does that mean that if a CBD product doesn't make a medicinal claim, it's not therefore a medicine?
Well, the MHRA have actually anticipated this, and the CBD guidance they've issued indicates that because of emerging evidence in relation to the clinical efficacy of CBD, it could in the future regard certain products to fall within the second limb of the definition of a medicinal product by its action, as opposed to its presentation, which is the first limb. Essentially, the message is in the future that if a marketer only makes non-medicinal claims, the product could still be classed as a medicine and could trigger the need for a marketing authorization. This seems to be a matter of watch this space. And the ASA and CAP would always defer to the MHRA on issues of medicines. If it decides in the future that CBD products could be defined as medicines due to their efficacy, then it's up to marketers to make sure that they're aware of this and kind of keep up to date with the legislation.
So sort of watch this space. So is that it? Are there any other limits that we need to know about on claims for CBD products?
Yep, absolutely. It seems likely that an oral containing product is not a controlled substance or a novel food or a medicine by content or presentation. It would be defined simply as a food. I say simple, but in reality, actually, there are strict EU regulations that are in place in relation to health claims for foods. And these are reflected in the advertising codes, the CAP and BCAP codes. Talking about these code sections in any detail would be a webinar in itself, so we can't fit that in today, but I can quickly touch on the most relevant rules. So we understand there's a strong belief in the non-medicinal health benefits of CBD, but if a product is a food, then these health claims are going to be restricted or potentially not permitted at all. There are instances in which health claims for foods are permitted. So, for example, what is known as a general health claim might be acceptable. A general health claim is a reference to a general benefit of a nutrient or food for overall good health or health-related well-being. General health claims can refer to an effect which is generally beneficial, for example, healthy or good for you, or alternatively, they might refer to a broadly beneficial effect on a specific aspect of the health or the body.
So on talking about general health claims, what exactly is required to make a general health claim?
General health claims may only be made if they are accompanied in the ad by an appropriate specific authorised claim from the EU register. This is not a matter of whether you hold convincing evidence, but rather whether the claim has essentially been pre-approved for use by the EU. This essentially means that there are no approved claims. If there are no approved claims for a nutrient in the product, then you can't make any health claims. It's our understanding that there are currently no authorised claims for CBD, which would seem to suggest that any direct or implied health claims could not be made in relation to a product, an oral product that contains CBD. But if a product contained other ingredients, which are classed as nutrients, and there are authorised claims for those nutrients, then a health claim may be possible if made in relation to that particular nutrient, as opposed to the CBD in the product. CAP has got a lot of guidance on health claims for food, so we would really recommend looking at the codes, looking at the EU register, and reading CAP advice on the advice online section of the ASA website. Marketers can also contact the CAP copy advice team if they want further understanding on the issue of health claims in relation to foods, and we can comment on CBD to a certain extent as well.
So what about something like vaping? How would that work with CBD liquids?
Right, well, there are already rules in the CAP and BCAP code in relation to electronic cigarettes. In principle, medicinal claims are already prohibited for e-cigs unless they're licensed as medicines. So the same is likely to apply irrespective of whether that medicinal claim is being made in relation to the e-cig, the vape ingredients, or any CBD in the products. It also seems likely that the issue of the product containing a controlled substance isn't going to go away simply because the product isn't ingested. So again, we recommend getting legal advice in relation to that home office position we talked about earlier.
And you've got any other tips for marketers here, Janet?
It's difficult to say. As always, it kind of very much depends on the claims that are being made in the ad. So if after kind of you've absorbed everything we've discussed today and marketers still want some advice on the ad content rather than the classification of the product, which, as we've explained, is down to other kind of government departments and statutory regulators, then they should come to the copy advice team and take full advantage of all of the CAP advice and resources.
Great, thank you very much, Janet. Hopefully that answers some questions. And as Janet mentioned, the best place to go for help is the CAP copy advice team. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll see you next time.